So thanks again so much, Mark. Maybe you can just start by telling us a little bit about your background and your current position where you are.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm originally from New Orleans. Ended up moving to Nashville for high school after Hurricane Katrina, actually. So pretty interesting in terms of public policy there. And went to school in North Carolina at Wake Forest, where I studied philosophy and political science. I also minored in Italian. Part of that included a study abroad experience, actually via Syracuse University in Florence at a homestay, which is kind of where I became first interested in international relations. And that was a really great experience. So that was a first connection to Syracuse. After I graduated, I was an English teaching assistant outside of Milan for about 10 months in a small town called Gallerate, which is about 40 kilometers outside of Milan. It was quite a interesting experience in terms of really being by yourself and really being in the small town where there weren't so many Americans or English speakers. And then at that time, I realized that I really wanted to go back to school. That school was Syracuse. What particularly caught my eye was the Atlantis program, mostly due to the European component. And my original interest is in international security. So the Atlantis program was a great fit, and came to Maxwell in fall of 2014. And immediately I got involved with the Black Spots Project, which I believe Professor Brown has taken over. During my time, he was one of the professors, as well as Professor Herman and Professor Kafir, who I believe has left. So that was a really informative experience, doing a lot of open source intelligence research. Also, that first semester, I worked with Public Citizen, which is a firm that basically works to get money out of politics. And it was interesting because there was an employee who was working remotely. His wife was a professor at Syracuse, so he moved up from DC and opened a remote office in Syracuse. And I was an intern there, so that was kind of my first experience into the Washington, D.C. policy world and government affairs world. And then during the summer, I worked at the Council of Europe, working on drug trafficking issues in Brussels, which was very interesting. Great city, really enjoyed it. After that, moved to Berlin, studied there at the Hertie School of Governance, and did an internship at Transparency International, working in the Balkans. Not working physically in the Balkans, but that was my focus area, doing good governance. And then finished out my studies in The Hague, Netherlands, where my firm now has an office, ironically, and moved to DC, finished my thesis, and after a couple odd jobs and another internship at a think tank, I landed here in my current position as a legislative assistant, starting April.
Would you mind, before telling us maybe about your, well, no, let's start with, can you tell us about your current role and responsibilities?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I first landed my role, there was a big electric vehicle client, and I kind of threw myself into that issue. And now we're working on several electric vehicle projects and doing kind of projections, risk analyses, and things like that for the electric vehicle market. Part of that has also led to different alternative fuels research. So, for instance, natural gas, liquefied natural gas, compressed natural gas, things like that. Also, an offshoot of that, which is something that is a major responsibility that I'm working on now, is working on a biodiesel projection project, which I'm helping to author with some principals in my firm, looking at long-term projections to about 2025, 2030. And biodiesel, of course, is another alternative fuel, and it's heavily mandated by the federal government through the renewable fuel standard. So really the intersection of energy and renewables and policy. In terms of European business development, because of my several connections to Europe, I have been working to help facilitate introductions and business opportunities in the Netherlands as well as in Germany. And one of a recent startup that we started working with does translation services. So that's kind of fallen into my wheelhouse in terms of helping to introduce this translation service to different European partners that we and myself particularly have contacts with.
And then, if you wouldn't mind, can you tell us about the transition from graduation and landing your current position?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's an interesting transition for sure. So I came back from The Hague to my home in Nashville in late July 2016. Finished my thesis and moved to Washington, D.C. That August. I was lucky enough to be able to stay with my sister who lives in the Maryland suburbs of D.C. It's about a 2-hour commute every day. So I was applying to a lot of jobs while I was still in Europe, finishing out my studies. But also once I got to the DC area, applying to several jobs, mostly looking at think tank things. But then I quickly expanded my search to be more comprehensive. I ended up getting an internship at the International Institute for Strategic Studies, which is a think tank headquartered in London, and it has offices in Washington, D.C. During my time there, I mostly focused on nuclear nonproliferation issues with the director and senior fellow who heads up that program. It was a really cool opportunity, and I actually was able to get published twice via that opportunity. One for UN Institute for Disarmament Research. So that was really cool, and kind of getting some experience in the think tank field. My internship ended in December, and at that time I was working at a restaurant at night and then a cafe as a barista in the morning. Rent's pretty expensive in DC, while also applying to more jobs. Actually, via my restaurant job, I ended up meeting my current boss and just kind of struck up a conversation, and he handed me his business card. I emailed him, and a couple lunches later, he offered me a job in April, and that's kind of how I landed in my position now. It was somewhat fortuitous, but also, that's kind of the way things tend to happen in DC. So that's how I landed in my current position. I have a public policy master's as well as my international relations master's from Syracuse. But I didn't really have a lot of energy or energy efficiency or renewable experience until coming into this position. Sometimes that stuff doesn't really matter, I guess.
Yeah, I'm glad I asked. That's a good story. Before I launch into other questions, I want to check in with you guys and if you have specific questions, you can totally go for it.
So I've heard a lot of people say when you're applying to jobs in DC, unless you have a DC address to put on your application, it's almost like a don't even bother kind of scenario. Do you find that to be the truth?
That's an interesting question. I definitely heard something similar coming to DC. So I don't really think, you necessarily have to put an address on your resume or CV. It's not necessary. But also, you can easily ask a friend if you can put their address if you think that that's an issue. Like, not really an issue, and not really that I encountered that was an issue. No one ever brought it up, but it is something that I have heard before. But I think, you can use my address if you want.
Thank you. I think I can figure it out. Also, I have a follow-up. Is it working as a legislative assistant? Was that difficult without a JD, or did you find that pretty easy to fall right into?
So, some of my responsibilities would be easier if I had a legal background like a JD, but it's not inhibiting by any means or anything like that. Sometimes when you're looking at a contract and trying to edit a contract, obviously having a mastery of legal language would be beneficial, of course, but certainly not necessary by any means and not expected. So like, especially in terms of Senate or House legislative assistant jobs, it's not expected.
So I have a quick question. With the Atlantis program, did you find that you had to have any knowledge of German before you went, and were there opportunities for you to pick it up while you were there?
So during my time in the Atlantis program, we actually had weekly German classes led by a German Atlantis student who was a graduate assistant within the Moynihan Institute. Those sessions weren't required, but I went to them. I enjoyed it. I also audited a German class for my first semester, which I ended up dropping because it was at, I think, like 8:30 a.m. So about a month in, I decided that it wasn't really worth my while to wake up at that time after, studying all night in Syracuse. But I was relatively proficient in terms of ordering things and getting around. But if you can do those basic things, living in Berlin is not an issue. I was surprised by how few people seem to speak English in Berlin, but it wasn't like I never had any issues in regards to that. And my German was okay that I could order and do some basic things. So.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
I had a question just about kind of the political and legislative attitudes towards renewables in Europe, and kind of how you've been experiencing that, and is there any differences to maybe how things are over here?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. I'm not really sure that I'm equipped to answer it. Most of my expertise and responsibilities have to do with kind of domestic energy policy, as opposed to European energy policy. I know that from my work on this biodiesel project, Europe has a lot more diesel passenger cars than the U.S., and they were originally more open to that. However, several cities like Madrid, Athens, Paris, and London have passed or are considering bans on having those diesel vehicles in the city centers. And the way that they were mandating the European renewable fuel standard was about lowering carbon, as opposed to mandating certain numbers of volumes like biodiesel or ethanol in their system. But obviously, Europe is more open to climate change research than some people in the U.S. and things like that. So generally, the attitude is more trying to solve actual climate change issues, whereas the renewable fuel standard in the U.S., which is kind of a climate change policy, it's also kind of underlined by agricultural interests as well as kind of energy security arguments. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think generally I'm not an expert in it, but I think European policies tend to look at it a little differently, and likely for kind of the more accepting of those arguments.
All right, I can ask a question. First of all, thank you so much for taking time to do this. We all really appreciate it. And one thing I'm kind of curious about is, what's the culture of your office like? What's it like to actually work there?
Yeah, so we're a relatively small office. We have 2 people based in the Netherlands and 6 people headquartered in our DC office. So that includes 3 principals and 3 legislative assistants, which I'm the legislative assistant. So the office culture is good. It's very close. Typically, we try to eat an office meal once a week. We try to have like Salad Tuesdays, which have kind of transitioned to Salad Thursdays in order to keep healthy and also make sure that we're keeping in communication with each other. But with it being a small office, if I need something or if somebody needs something from me, it's really easy to just go into someone's office whose doors are mostly open. Typically, if not, you can knock, and everyone's more than willing to discuss something or talk about something. So it's a pretty conducive office environment for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This might be very like strictly limited, but what do you think about the career services department at Berkeley? Because here we have an amazing department, but
Thank you.
what are they like at Berkeley?
Yeah, so career services at Hertie, I think you will find that European universities aren't service oriented as U.S. schools, partly because you're not paying as much tuition, so they feel less obligated to help you. Not that people at Maxwell feel obligated to help you. They obviously want to help, but the whole culture is different. So my experience with career services at Hertie, I would say, is few and far between, because the services they offer are less, and also their network in the U.S. is quite minimal, and they don't really have much of a DC presence. Every now and then I'm contacted for a networking or like alumni event, but from my understanding, there's not that many Hertie alumni in the U.S., more specifically in DC. I know that there's several people from my Atlantis cohort that have Hertie degrees that are in the U.S., but I'm not sure if that's, but like, I don't think that that's normal for Hertie people to come to DC.
Mark, could you tell us, so you've been, what is it, October? So you've been in your job a few months now. Can you tell us what you're enjoying about it, and maybe what's been more difficult or difficult to transition into?
Sure. The thing I like about the most is having a security background. Is getting to learn something new every day, and that's really great. And having the opportunity and responsibility to write things for clients and not necessarily be in charge of things, but kind of take the lead on some issues and some clients, and really feel like you're moving forward with them and doing a good job. Some of the weaknesses would be, I think everything's really, really busy. So for instance, if you're writing a memo or a report to a client, trying to get a principal's attention for that issue is difficult, and you kind of have to fight among other people in the office for attention in terms of those issues, just because we have so many clients and we're working on so many issues that there's only so many hours in a day. So some things necessarily have to go to the back burner. And it's about trying to prioritize, and sometimes that prioritization is difficult or frustrating when it's kind of your portfolio that's getting pushed to the back burner. So that's what I would say is a weakness, but I'm not sure. I think that's kind of inherent in the government affairs field.
Definitely. Thank you. Could you also speak to, well, you had your Maxwell experience, obviously complemented with your Hertie experience too, but what, I guess sort of a two-pronged question, what do you feel like is some of the most valuable things that you gained here as far as skills that you're applying to your position, and then also kind of on the other side of that, are there things you wish you'd taken advantage of when you were in either program?
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the greatest things that I took advantage of, but also something that I kind of missed out on is going to things like this. I was heavily involved with the Black Spots project, and that was probably one of the most informative experiences for figuring out kind of what I wanted to do and what my interests really were, and also gaining real research experience outside of the classroom in terms of looking at open source, open intelligence, and things like that. And I went to, in my capacity as a graduate assistant from Black Spots, I went to several events with generals and things like that, which were really great. However, I wish that I went to more events because there's so many at Maxwell, and so much of the learning takes place outside of the classroom in events like this that are really important. And I think that as that was probably the thing that helped me the most, I think that's also kind of something that I wish I experienced more, because it is so important to hear kind of people who have walked the path before you, and hopefully not make the same mistakes that I made or people before me made, etc. So I think career talks, also having really interesting people. Like I think while I was here, Joint Chief of Staff General Dempsey was here, which was really great. And I think Ash Carter also came, former Secretary of Defense, and I was able to attend both of those events. So really interesting to see how policymakers and how officials kind of view some of the things that you're learning in the classroom, and see how they're applying some of the theories or not applying. So I guess that would be my answer to this two-pronged question.
All right, I got one. What kind of people do you think would enjoy or would either enjoy working in the environment that you're in, or would benefit the organization that you're working in a lot?
Yeah, so I really enjoy research and writing, and thinking about things strategically and making an argument and fleshing that out on paper. And in my role, I'm able to do a lot of that writing and things like that. For instance, not something that is in my traditional portfolio, but we recently wrote a letter to the National Organic Standard Board, because we have a client that's involved in vertical agriculture. If you know what that is, it's like controlled environment agriculture, hydroponic, aeroponic, aquaponic. And I was able to help formulate some of the arguments in that letter to the National Organic Standard Board. And that was something that I really enjoyed doing, and able to kind of strategically put together an argument to make our case for it. And I think that's one of the things that I enjoy most about this role. And I think people who enjoy similar things would also enjoy it. It's not like I'm taking lots of meetings with clients or things like that. I'm relatively new in the role, so I'm not going to a lot of member meetings with congressmen or senators or things like that. So if that's what you're expecting, then you might be disappointed, even though I'm sure you can build up to that.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I have a quick question. Do you think that your degree from Hertie set you apart in any way, or was it mostly for the experience?
So it's something that I've talked about and thought about a lot with people in my cohort, people in my Atlantis cohort. And I'm also relatively close with some people from the Atlantis cohort before me. And I think that honestly, having that second degree didn't add so much added value. And I think like it prepared me for the roles, but it didn't help me to get some of those roles, if that makes sense. So for instance, I mean, a lot of times people don't even look at your CV. I mean, I think I was hired in this job and they didn't even know that I had a master's degree, because it just wasn't something that they looked at, because it was more of a personal connection that I had with the CEO and founder who hired me. And I think that as having seen some hiring processes since I've been in DC, I think that having a master's degree is really, really important. Having a second one is infinitely less important. Having a master's degree qualifies you for basically any job that you're looking at. Having that second master's doesn't necessarily make you more qualified or make you stand out more compared to other people. But with all that said, it's not like I in any way regret pursuing 2 master's degrees or going to Europe for a year or being able to work at Transparency International or write a thesis. I think those were infinitely helpful in terms of my career development as well as my personal development. So I hope that answers your question. It might not have been the answer that you wanted to hear, but having 2 master's degrees is never a bad thing, but it just might not help you stand out in DC as much as maybe you think.
I know, I appreciate the transparency.
Yeah.
All right. I thought of another question.
Sure.
You don't have to give the specifics if you don't want to, but do you feel, this is a genuine concern, especially for those that want that. For us, I can't speak today, particularly for us that want to live in expensive cities like DC, New York, etc. Do you feel that with the salary that you're getting, whatever that is, do you feel that you're able to live and even enjoy the city to some degree? Or do you feel that you need a second job, you need some other benefit, or anything like that? If this is too personal or anything, please don't feel that you have to be forced to say anything.
No, it's a good question, and it's definitely an interesting question and one that I'm sure people are interested in hearing. So my salary is okay. It's probably, with someone coming out of graduate school, not as, especially at such a competitive school as Maxwell, it's not as high as I would like it to be or I think it should be. And I took the job at the salary because of several somewhat complicated reasons, which if you email me, I'm happy to kind of go through, but I'm not going to bore you guys with all the details right now. With that said, the salary is good enough to pay off my student loans, which I'm now paying all of them. They have ended their deferment period. So now I have a somewhat hefty student loan payment each month. Rent is probably the most expensive thing. I pay about $11.50 a month for a 1-bedroom in a 2-bedroom apartment, which is a lot. But I'm lucky enough that my employer takes care of my transportation and metro costs to and from work, which is beneficial, and they also pay my health insurance, which is also incredibly beneficial. And I've been able to save some money and things like that. So it's not like I'm living a lavish lifestyle, but I'm doing okay. And I mean, if you're in the 40 to 50 range in DC, you can probably do okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And that falls, I think, within the average Maxwell student graduates in the 40 to 60 range. The majority do. Can you have a little side hustle I see on your resume, I believe. Researcher at Wikistrat. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so there's not so much to tell. Wikistrat is a very interesting crowdsourced kind of company where they solicit opinions and kind of written things from quote unquote experts. I was able to qualify due to some of my experiences looking at open source intelligence, mostly on organized crime and terrorism. And that's something that I started in last August, 2016, to kind of put something else on my resume that wasn't an internship or a fellowship. But I haven't really done so much work with them. And it's kind of like a do research and contribute when you can. And I haven't really done so much research or contribution, though I'm still part of the network and part of that expert network. It is unpaid. So But for instance, I don't know if you know who Anne-Marie Slaughter is. She's founder of New America and a former Princeton professor. So she's also, quote unquote, one of my colleagues at Wikistrat, as well as some pretty high up military officials and things like that. So it's an interesting opportunity, but it's not really one that I can say that I've taken advantage of or that's really mattered in terms of my career development.
Other questions from you all? Go ahead.
Oh.
Please, it's all about you.
I was wondering if you ever considered staying back in Germany?
Yes, so I'm interested in moving back to Europe for sure. I'm trying to kind of get some DC experience for about 5 years and then potentially transition kind of my experience here to a potential position somewhere in Europe. I think that for my interests, a city that makes particular sense for me is Brussels, as the head of the EU and things like that, and a place that I know somewhat well and have some contacts with. So yeah, I'm thinking about moving back, but in terms of where I'm at in my career right now, it doesn't really make sense. And also, I think if you are interested in living in Europe, having some DC experience is incredibly helpful, as well as getting your salary high, because I think the EU is notorious for kind of low-paying salaries coming out of school and things like that. So it's something that I'm interested in, but it's not something that I'm actively considering right now.
To follow up on Rashna's question, when you were at Hertie, was there any way that you could stay for an extra year? Like I heard something about a 1-year work visa when you graduate.
So I'm not really sure about that. I know that regular Hertie students are able to do what's called a professional year, in which basically you put your studies on hold and do an internship or a 1-year fellowship during that time before completing your studies at Hertie. It's not something that I looked into for a variety of reasons, but I wouldn't be surprised if a program did exist. So I don't really know much more about that, sorry.
That's okay, thank you.
Okay, then I have, does anyone else have any more questions? Because then I'll end with 2.
Okay.
1, can our friends here contact you if they have any follow-up questions or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you if you are in DC or looking for a place to stay, I know there's several networking trips. Definitely ask. I'm not guaranteeing that you can stay with me or anything like that, but definitely ask. I would be a good contact, and maybe I can point you to a couch that is free. So yeah, definitely contact me if you have any follow-up questions or anything else that you're interested in. Feel free to do that.
Okay, and you can see us if you want Mark's contact information. And then I'll give you another 2-pronged question. First, what advice do you have for everyone? And then just if there isn't anything that we've asked you about that you want to speak to.
Yeah, so something that really helped me in terms of networking and career development when I first got to DC was talking about my interests with people, because you never really know who knows someone in DC, and whether or not you're talking to someone you just met on the street and say, I went to Maxwell and studied international relations or public administration, and you're interested in X, Y, and Z, that person could potentially put you in contact with someone who could really help you and put you in a great position. I think that the alumni network at Maxwell is particularly strong, and everyone, when I was in your position, was more than willing to talk to me and put in a good word for me with their organizations if I was interested in it, or point me to more people or more organizations that I would have been a good fit for. So those are my, I guess, two advices. Definitely use the alumni network in DC as well as just throughout the world. It's a global network. I was able to meet some of the Berlin alumni, which was a really cool experience, and they're really doing great things. And then also, don't be afraid to talk about your interests. Don't be afraid to say that you're looking. Don't be pushy, but don't be afraid to talk about your interests with people in the city or anywhere really, because one, I mean, you guys are all interesting people and you're all doing interesting things, and you probably have all had an interesting path to the point where you are right now. And two, you never know, how that's going to help you, whether it's making a friend or making a career connection or anything like that. So, and then, I'm sorry, what was the other question?
The danger of a double-barreled question is forgotten, but if there's anything else that, no one specifically asked you about, but you think are important things to know or interesting bits of information.
Yeah, let me take a second. No, I don't know. I mean, if I could just reiterate again to use the resources outside of the classroom at Maxwell, I think that's really, really important and something I took more advantage of while I was a student. I don't think I really went to career services while I was at Maxwell, which was probably a negative, and probably why it took me so long to land a position in Washington, D.C. But go to the talks, go to the career talks, go to any seminar, go to professional talks, go to interesting events that you see, and definitely take advantage of everything. And don't be afraid to start looking for a job while you're in school, because the processes are quite long, especially if you're looking for a job in the security field with the U.S. government. The clearance process is a nightmare and it takes forever. And particularly with a new administration, which isn't so new now, but most of the people who are getting these jobs in the administration haven't held clearances before, and your priority is going to be well far beneath them. So start now, and yeah, like if you are interested in something like that, then definitely apply now, because it's a nightmare of a process. So.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Yes. So any last questions? Awesome. Well, Mark, thank you so much. We really appreciate talking to you, and you may hear from some of our lovely friends here. So
yeah, absolutely.
So much for joining us.
And especially if you're looking for those Atlanta students, places in Berlin to live, or suggestions, neighborhoods, restaurant recommendations, anything like that. You can ask me about anything. I can also share my CV if that would help. Maybe so you can, if there's a particular thing that catches your eye that I can help you with, I'm more than willing to help you guys in any way. So have a good day. I don't know what the temperature is like in Syracuse, but
Not bad.
Yeah.
not bad. All right. Well,
Yeah.
starting in November, you're not going to see the ground until May.
So true. Awesome. Well, thank you, Mark. Have a great day.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.